Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. Even though I'm a grown-up, I still like to be read to. And maybe you, even if you're a grown-up, you like to be read to. So these are some of the stories from my book, Light, stories on the lighter side of life. And this is my sweet Hachi, who will see how much he likes listening to stories. Anyway, the first one is called Good Deed. Hey, Dominic, give me the big one. Yeah, the one in the corner, that's it. That's what got me started. I used to just give people the next slice in the pie, but then I thought, personalize it. I give the big guys the biggest slice, the skinnies a little slice, those size 2s who want to stay tiny. And if I wasn't sure which piece they wanted, I'd ask them. And if I liked them, I'd throw in a couple of pieces of sausage, mushrooms, whatever, like as a gift. They loved that. So I started putting 2 or 3 pieces on everyone's slice. Owner didn't mind. Cost them almost nothing and got them more customers. I think some people actually bought a second slice to see what I put on it. When they knew I'd be doing that, they made requests. But I refused to put pineapple. It's a sin to put pineapple on pizza. I'd have to go to confession, which I do not like to do. After a while, like the bartender at Angelo's down the street, I knew people's regular order, like Fido, pepperoni, Carmela, mushrooms, Jose, olives. I did that for like 20 years. I am not the ambitious type. But when Carlo, he's the owner, said he was tired and he asked me if I wanted to buy the business, I said, you crazy? With the wife and 3 kids, I can't afford nothing. Thanks, but no thanks. But I told Sal, he's a regular, that I felt good that Carlo had offered it. And Carlo hung around the store, and everyone who came in, he said, Carlos are tired. You want to give a 50, a 500, a 500 so Dom can buy it at the store? I couldn't believe it, but Sal raised $9,250. Carlo wanted $10K, but Carlo said, forget about it. As long as you change the name from Carlo's Pizza to Dom's Pizza. So for the next 20 years, I ran Dom's Pizza. I'm old now, and so I gave the business to Maria, who's been working here for 5 years now. As I gave her the deed to the business, she said, good deed. That's funny, right? Good deed. I hope she changes the name to Maria's Pizza. Anyway, that story was Good Deed. Next story is called Ugly. I was born with a cleft palate. Now I'm in high school, and I still don't look quite normal. I've tried lots of things to be liked. For example, even though I'm self-conscious, when I walk down the halls, I look up and sometimes even force a smile. When a kid doesn't seem to understand what I'm saying, I apologize and ask if he or she would like me to try again. But it hasn't worked. The kids are polite, but that's it. So I thought about running for student council on an anti-lookist platform. I even thought about getting a t-shirt that said, do you really want to avoid somebody because they're ugly? But I wasn't brave enough for that. But finally, I had an idea. I'd try out to be a cheerleader. Cheerleading is for the pretty people, and just maybe if I could get on the team, it could show you don't have to be good looking even to be a cheerleader. But when I asked the cheerleading teacher, Ms. Lowood, she said, of course you can try out, but it takes a lot to be a cheerleader, especially on our team. We've won many awards. I got the sense she didn't want me, but didn't want to show that. So she said, I'll consider you if you can learn to do an aerial. I didn't even know what an aerial was, but when I found out, I was sure she didn't want me. It's gymnastics' toughest stunt. It's a cartwheel without your hands ever touching the ground. But my mother said, Hari, you're athletic. You can do it. My mom's a go-getter, so she got right on the computer and searched for one-on-one gymnastics coaches, and she found one. Mary worked me hard, but I tried to do even more than she asked. At first, the cheerleaders practicing on the other side of the gym didn't pay attention to me because I was just working on the basics. A headstand, forward roll. But when one day I was working on a round-off, which is the last step before an aerial, I think they got nervous. They didn't want a cleft palate on their award-winning cheerleading team. So the head cheerleader, Gemma, snuck over to me and whispered, how Halloween Harry's going to try out to be a cheerleader. Halloween Harry. And she pranced away. The cheerleaders may have gotten even more nervous when they saw me making progress on the aerial. Finally, Mary, my gymnastics tutor, said I was ready, and I walked into cheerleading practice a few minutes before it was to begin. Ms. Lowood seemed surprised to see me. She had assumed that she had dissuaded me by saying that I'd need to do an aerial before even allowing me to try out. But she asked evenly, "Can you do an aerial?" I nodded, and she said, "Okay. The cheerleaders are here for practice, but I suppose you could do it for them." I got nervous, and even more so when Gemma smirked at me. I took a deep breath. My takeoff was okay, and I kept my legs perfectly straight, just as Mary had taught me. But at the top of my aerial, the hardest part, I guess my nervousness distracted me for just a moment, and I fell. The pain was bad, but I was able to keep it in, even when they put me on the stretcher. The principal asked me to give a speech at graduation, and here is what I said. My parents wanted me to tell you that trying out for cheerleader struck a blow against lookism, but that's not what I wanted to say. I want to say that you, me, everyone has had bad experiences, sometimes bad failures, embarrassing failures. If my cleft palate and cheerleading accident have a good side, it's to remind us that whatever crap has happened to us, we might want to stop looking back and just take the next step forward. Maybe even do an aerial. Anyway, that story was ugly. The next story is The Devil Went Down to Mississippi. It's a takeoff on it. There's this famous song called The Devil Went Down to Georgia. And it's based on a true story. I fit right in as a professor at the city of New York. I'm an in-your-face New Yorker and a revolutionary. So you can imagine how pissed I was when they laid me off. Colleges preach worker rights, yet you pay a shit, and now you let me go? Didn't help much that they said, well, there'll probably be a job for you next semester. I needed to find a job fast, but the only job I could get was a fill-in at a super conservative college, Southwestern Baptist in Yavu, Georgia, a town best known for being northeast of Darnville, the first county seat. It actually was in Mississippi, right over the Georgia border. I bargained like a New Yorker trying to get a deal on a diamond, and Southwest Baptist paid me enough to go down there for a semester. I figured it would teach me about the enemy. The faculty welcomed me in Southern style, thanking me so very much for coming on down here. Bless your heart. They even invited me to a party. There was no mistaking it for a New York rager. There was lots of bourbon, but no white wine, let alone weed, and a hog on a spit with a professor turning it. The trick here is you got to keep the fat dripping evenly. And there was dancing. And I'm not talking hip-hop. It was something called the Western swing, which some professor said, trying to sound liberal, it's a blend of blues and jazz on top of polka and cowboy music and swing. A ginormous guy wearing a cowboy hat and a fat, shiny belt buckle came up and said, "Hi, I'm Travis Calhoun. I teach in the health sciences department. May I have the pleasure of this dance?" He wasn't my type, but I figured when in Mississippi, and would you believe I liked him? Maybe opposites do attract. He is quiet, and I have to admit, I am louder than a Harley with an illegal exhaust. And he is oh so Southern, and I am oh so Bronx. But oh, can he dance. He kept whirling me around like, well, a pig on a spit. Travis asked if I'd go with him to the Buckin' Bronco. That's a bar with a bull riding machine and dancing. Well, I did like dancing with him, so we watched people ride the Buckin' machine laughing, yee-hawing, and falling off. Travis lasted longer than most, and when he strode back like a bow-legged cowboy, he said, "Okay, your turn." How could I, badass feminist, say no? So I got on. He did set it to the slowest speed, and when I nodded, he turned it up, and then up again. And then I fell, and my luck, right on my knee and couldn't get up. Travis, the health sciences guy, looked and said, just a teeny dislocate. Fix you right up in a jiffy. He snapped it back. It hurt like hell, but only for a moment, and then I was fixed. It kind of makes you love a guy. Long story short, Travis and I dated, and before final exams, he asked me to marry him. It'll probably be the only wedding reception with pig and pastrami. Anyway, that story is The Devil Went Down to Mississippi. Next story, fallen fashion. I just couldn't stand processing yet more insurance claims, too many of which were phony. So even though I wouldn't get my full pension, I retired. At first, I did the usual retiree things, linger over coffee, grandkids, play the piano, but after a year, I got bored. I needed excitement, so I decided to try day trading stocks. You see, I had this theory. Teenagers fall for the latest fashion, quickly tire of it, and move on to the next fad. Yoga pants are in, then they're out. Ripped jeans are in, then they're out. Pajama pants are in, and soon they'll be toast. So I looked for stocks in decline that sold teen fashion in malls. Warren Buffett said, never catch a falling knife. So I screened those stocks to find those that had declined more than 50% from a year ago. I shorted those stocks. That meant I would make money if they continued to decline. And I did make money, but I lost peace of mind. I even had trouble sleeping. All I could think of is whether yoga togs would rise again. So while I made some money, given all the time it took me, I was earning only $10 an hour. Even if I had made $100 an hour, the stress wasn't worth it. So I replaced day trading with video games, adrenaline, without risk. My grandkids now call me Grandpa Gamer. Anyway, that story is fallen fashion. The next story is Daisy. I've had few friends, platonic or romantic. Maybe it's just that I'm not handsome and not a great conversationalist, but I would never have thought that my best friend would be a daisy. I was coming home from work, and just before I reached my apartment building, I noticed a daisy peeking through a crack in the concrete. Lovely symbol. I weighed whether to leave it, but I knew that especially in the concrete it would fade and die in a day or two. So with the lunch spoon from my backpack, I lifted the daisy plant with as much root as I could and rushed into my building. With a pencil, I poked a hole in the bottom of a foam cup, filled it with soil from my other plants, and put the daisy in. I put it in the shade to avoid stressing the poor little transplant, and I hoped. The first thing I did when I got up the next morning was to check on my baby. It wasn't wilted. Yay! I was tempted to baby it by watering right away, but I waited until the top was dry, and each day I moved it a bit closer to the windowsill so it would gradually get used to the sun. And it grew. I found watching the day's growth the most rewarding moment of my day. Then I got crazy. I started talking to my daisy. I'm not creative. I called it just Daisy. I told you I wasn't a brilliant conversationalist. At first, I would just say, "Good morning, Daisy. Did you sleep well?" But before long, I started telling it my hopes. For example, "I think a coworker in the break room likes me." She said, "How are you?" but in a way that conveyed she actually wanted to know. "I think tomorrow I'm going to make a point of coming into the break room when she's there." And Daisy continued to grow, including a new flower bud. And the bud opened to a daisy bigger than the original. I know it's irrational, but I can't think of anything that made me happier. One time, I told Daisy I was afraid I'd never get ahead, that I'd always be alone, die alone. It did not feel good to get that off my chest. A week later, I noticed that the new daisy flower was fading and that the leaves were starting to yellow. I was scared. I tried fertilizing, watering more, watering less, more sun, less sun, but nothing seemed to help. And then it wilted, and so did I. But I am going to buy daisy seeds. Anyway, that story is Daisy. And the final story is Prince Charming. Prince Charming is not the cardboard character he's portrayed as. He's aware he did nothing to earn his title or wealth, so he renounced his throne and, using the knowledge he acquired from trying Cinderella's slipper on all the princess wannabes, he became a shoemaker, specializing in comfortable but attractive women's shoes, not a stiletto in sight. And so he became respected throughout the land, while the king and queen were, like many leaders, liberal or conservative, reviled for their shallow pomp and often unethical exercise of power. Women, young and old, came for his shoes, expensive custom ones and inexpensive off-the-rack ones. And if a customer were poor, He would give them used shoes that people traded in, or new custom ones that the customer decided she didn't like. He dated a few of the women, but couldn't find one he wanted to share his life with until Rachel walked in. He was shocked to see her. After all, she was the king and queen's chief advisor. And after he renounced his princehood, they disowned him. But as always, Rachel was an independent, wise thinker who made decisions on the merits, and she admired him for trading a title for the chance to earn his keep. He was impressed that although Rachel had money, she bought an off-the-rack pair, and one that, while attractive, wasn't showy. Rachel was a couple of years older than him, so his reflexive thought was to not ask her on a date. But he reflected and decided to. And they enjoyed each other, whether discussing ethics over hot mulled cider, romping in the fields, even playing in the snow, and in his cottage. But what moved him to want to marry her is when she quit her job as chief advisor to the king and queen. She explained, "I'm tired of their ignoring my advice, especially my advice to lower taxes rather than expand their already lavish castle and bloated, inefficient government." He asked, "So do you know what you're going to want to do to earn a living?" She replied, "Be your partner in the shoe store." He replied, "Yes, absolutely. But would you also be my partner in life?" She said not a word, but looked into his eyes and hugged him. Some of the townspeople, who he and Rachel privately called the mob, laughed. One group of them, in the middle of the night, even painted graffiti on the side of the shoe store's cottage. "See how far they've fallen," the sign said. But he and Rachel decided to invite the entire town to the wedding. Because they thought it wiser to use the money to buy a home than on a party, even a wedding party, they held it in the field where they had romped, and they made the lunch potluck. It would take place on Thanksgiving, saving the people the cost of creating 2 lunches. He and Rachel invited his parents, the king and queen, but doubted they would come. After all, they had renounced him, but Rachel had quit working for them. But while the king and queen were the last to arrive, they did, just in time for the ceremony. And when he and Rachel, in their exchange of vows, simultaneously said, "And we pledge to give as much love to the world as we give to each other," the queen cried, the king pursed his lips, and the royal couple promised each other that from that day forth, they would try to live and lead by those words of their children. Yes, the king and queen would think of Rachel as their child. And now, for real, they lived happily ever after. Anyway, that story was Prince Charming. I like coming and reading aloud to you, and I hope you'll join me for the next time. In any event, that was from my book, Light. So I'll just say thank you very much if you've been watching this. I appreciate you, and I hope you appreciate me. I'm Marty Nemko.